She thumps a cane and drinks champagne. She's formidable and judgmental, but we can guarantee that she's a quintessential Lady D, who recognizes great potential. What would Danbury do?
Welcome to What Would Danbury Do, a podcast about the Bridgerton series from A to V. A picture may be worth 1,000 words, but how much is it worth if it hangs in Bridgerton House? Kate spoke with art historian and writer Nancy Langham-Hooper about portraits, statuary, and a surprising amount of subtext if you know how to read a room. Don't forget you can find us on Twitter and Facebook as @BridgertonPod and Instagram as WWDDPod. And join the conversation using the hashtag WWDDPod. I think I speak for all three of us when I say we'd particularly love to discuss phallic philosophy with you, because wow. This episode is brought to you by Kensington's newest release from Minerva Spencer, Outrageous. It's the second book in Minerva's Rebels of the Ton series, about a younger generation of London aristocracy who are breaking the rules of the Regency to follow their dreams and forge their own paths. In Outrageous, we meet Eva de Courtney, a young woman with a plan to protect her brother by kidnapping the notorious Godric Fleming. But things go awry after she gets him in her carriage, and it becomes unclear who is kidnapping whomst and where this carriage ride might end. Booklist called Minerva's books an irresistible cocktail of smart characterization, sophisticated sensuality, and sharp wit, and frankly, we agree. We're powerless against a trope-reversal, and we stand a forward-thinking heroine. You can find Outrageous and the other books in the Rebels of the Ton series by Minerva Spencer anywhere books are found. Find out more on minervaspencer.com.
My name is Nancy Langham-Hooper. I'm an art historian and a writer, and I have a YouTube channel called The Art Doctor.
First, I want to talk generally about art in the Regency period. Mm-hmm. Who were the artists and what kind of art was being produced?
There were, and especially in England, you have two main big hitters, which are Sir Joshua Reynolds and Gainsborough. And they were two quite different styles, but they mostly did portraits of all the ton. So in the Regency period, there were all sorts of different kinds of art. There's always been, and especially in England, all the way through the 18th and 19th centuries, you had hierarchies of art, least spiritual to the most spiritual. So you had landscapes at the bottom, and then like genre scenes, which is like scenes of everyday life, and portraits. And then you're getting up into like scenes of mythology and scenes of the, from the Bible. And those were called history painting, because it'd be like talking about creating a story out of something, or recreating a Bible story or a myth or something. So there was all this hierarchy. But what you see most in Bridgerton, what were most in people's homes, were portraits, because this was the only way you would actually be able to remember what somebody looked like quite accurately, really. So if you had the means to have a portrait done, you would do a portrait, sometimes several portraits of a person over their lifetime. And then they would hang as appropriate, whether you like them or, if you really like them, you put them right over the mantle. And if you didn't like them, they just hang by the toilet.
I want to segue into like the kind of art that we would see hanging in personal homes. But before we get to that, I want to talk a little bit about portraits.
Yeah.
So you say it was the only way that people would know what a person looked like, obviously, because photography hadn't been invented yet. But surely a good portrait artist would be very kind to their subject.
And this is the one thing, because I've been looking at the portraits in Bridgerton of the actors that they've had to make. So obviously a lot of the art is really from that time, but obviously the ones of the actors they had to make. And one of the big differences is that there were stylized portraits done in the 18th and 19th century. So you would have, it was you, but with like a Instagram filter, 18th century filter. Regency filter. There you go. So it would be you, but it would be slightly stylized. But we are not used to seeing that. So one of the big differences between the portraits of the actors and the portraits that are authentic portraits that you see in the background is that, for instance, the actors are not slim and pale. Is it like pale to the point where you're like, are you okay? Do you need to sit down? That's how pale you needed to be, men and women, in the Regency period in your portrait. So you had to be super pale. If we saw that in the actors, we would think, oh, what's wrong? And they didn't want to create that feeling in the audience, I'm sure. So you have people who look a lot more flesh-colored.
Right.
It would also tend to be flattering. It depends on who it is. Some sitters don't really care about it being flattering. Some just say to the artist, no, show me as I am. Mostly men who can afford to be shown as they are. But a lot of women are guzzied up a little bit. Look, if you're going to have one picture of yourself, one, that's going to hang on the wall of your house for generations to come, you don't want that zit that's sitting in the middle of your forehead to be there. If your shoulders aren't fashionable. Do you know that was a thing that they had?
No,
fashionable shoulders.
I really need to know what a fashionable shoulder looks like now.
Well, it didn't become a big deal until the 1840s, but they did have a certain, when you had the dresses with the lower neckline, there was a certain way that your shoulders would fall. If they were too boxy or square, that wouldn't be fashionable. You need a slope.
A delicate slope.
Oh, yes. And then it became a super black diamond ski slope by the 1840s. So where they actually started to tailor the dresses so you get like the crazy slope from the bottom of the shoulder all the way up to the neck. And and then it was a big thing like, how do you make your shoulders look more slopey in your dress?
Fashion has a lot to answer for.
It really does. So just like today, people tweak their photos. We all take photos from above, right? Because it's more flattering from above than from below. It's just that kind of thing. So of course it would be as flattering as possible, but it would still have to look like you.
Let's go back to the question I was originally going to ask. So obviously at this point in time, we're talking about the kind of people who could afford to have portraits done or could afford to have art hanging in their homes are very wealthy families. So families of the aristocracy, families of the ton. How would they choose art? Like, how did they go about decorating their homes?
It really depends. So a family like the Bridgertons would have inherited a lot of it. And then you would have people like the Featheringtons who are more new money, and they would probably have to go commission or buy their portraits or any art that they kind of put up. And actually, one of the main ways that they would buy art, and it isn't just for the super wealthy, it was for, the middle class as well, especially as that was emerging toward the end of the 18th century and into the 19th. One of the places that you would go to buy art is the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, where we see the whole family go in episode, 3 or 4?
The Art of the Swoon.
The Art of the Swoon. There you go. And the art in that Art of the Swoon is the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition, where all the promising artists of the day, and the established ones as well, who are already members of the Royal Academy, bring their latest works. They hang them all the way up to the ceiling, and you see in the opening scene when you see Eloise walk in and you see these paintings just stacked to high heaven, that is absolutely how they did it, because they were trying to squeeze everyone in. And even then, a lot of people were rejected. So to have something hung at the Royal Academy was quite prestigious. But also, they were all for sale, all of them. So this was a art fair as much as it was an exhibition. So this is where you would go if you had a bit of dosh, and, you would go to the summer exhibition and you'd see, what's Mr. Gainsborough got this year if you have a lot of cash, or what's unknown person number 5 over here got. There's a great reference in there where Benedict talks to Grenville and insults his portrait, right? Which was actually a portrait done by a woman and is a very good portrait. So that was just part of the plot. There's nothing to do with that portrait at all. He said, that portrait should be skied. So what that meant is the less prestigious portraits got pushed further and further and further up the wall till you couldn't even see them really. And their only prestige, you know, they're very unlikely to be bought from there, but their prestige was, I exhibited at the Royal, this was exhibited at the Royal Academy of 1813. But if you were what they called on the line, which is basically eye level, then you were the most prestigious artist. And the 50 members of the Royal Academy were all on the line.
All right, so we're going to talk about specific pieces later, but I want to talk about two specific plot lines first.
Okay.
So first, I want to talk about Henry living his best art life. He is at the heart of our strong and fervent belief that Benedict is in fact bisexual and is going to have a gorgeous gay romance when his season comes up. Please don't disabuse us of this notion. We really want it to happen.
No, I would watch that.
So he ran essentially an artist salon.
Yes, of a type. I mean, the sex wasn't necessarily a part of an artist salon. When you were training to be an artist, the first thing you do is you go to the antique school and you would draw from statues, essentially. And then when you were sufficient at statues, then you could move on to a real human person. But if you were a woman or an unmarried man, you could not draw the nude female form. So you had to be a married man in order to see the naked women.
Right. In this only, apparently. Not in any other aspect of society, but in art.
In art, right. Yes. Because the idea was you need to know how the anatomy works. And so you can't really paint someone clothed well unless you know how they work naked. And even an artist would say, unless you know how their muscles lay on top of each other, unless you know how their skeletal structure is. So the women were left to try and draw from draped figures, which made them great at drawing drapery, but not so good at the whole, you know, body, which means that women couldn't be history painters. Because one of the things that was one of the key aspects of history painting, the highest genre of painting, is they always there's somebody nude in it, right? It's not a law. It just tended to happen a lot because they're all pervs. But so if you were not confident drawing nude forms or naked bodies or even just men in general, because you weren't allowed to draw men, this would really limit your history painting, which is another reason that you didn't often see women on the wall of the Royal Academy. The Royal Academy was founded in 1768, around there. And its initial founding members, including Sir Joshua Reynolds, who's the one that many of the portraits in Bridgerton are done after, and Gainsborough was part of it as well. But there were two founding women, Angelica Kauffman and Mary Moser. Angelica Kauffman was just flippin' genius. She was an amazing musician. In fact, I'm going to do a video on her very soon. So I've been thinking about Angelica Kauffman. And Mary Moser was amazing. She did mostly still lifes, floral still lives. Anyway, these two women managed to become founding members of the Royal Academy. And then there was not one woman RA until 1930.
Jesus.
I know.
So once you were admitted to the Royal Academy,
yeah,
were you like a member for life?
You were a member for life. You
could
have a pension. You got to put RA after your name.
Ooh.
I know. Well, I guess it's something.
Yeah.
You were certainly, it was very prestigious. There were only 50 of them. So you're one of the top 50 artists in the country.
And spots didn't open up until somebody died.
Yeah.
Right.
Or retired. But
okay.
Mostly died.
And how were you inducted as a member?
First, you became an associate. So you were ARA. And there could be more, I don't remember how many associates, there could be more than 50. And then from the associates every year, the academicians would vote, and then they would see who, if there's a slot open, they would see who gets it. So yeah, so it was a very prestigious thing to be RA. The other thing, getting back to Henry Granville, they never say whether he's RA or not, but to be honest, you can be a professional painter and not be a member of the Royal Academy. It just really, really helps. And you can certainly exhibit at the Royal Academy without being a member, which is how women actually made it onto the walls occasionally. But so the thing is that at this point, being an artist is actually quite a prestigious profession. What they set up in Bridgerton is kind of our version of what we think an artist is like. Like a true artist is a free spirit, is just a teensy bit debauched, is a little bit naughty, is, all of those things. And that kind of came in, that idea of an artist as outside of society and especially morally outside, that didn't come until the late 19th century. So we're about 100 years too early for that.
Right, okay.
And that came with the whole bohemian movement and the idea of like artists being sad, depressed geniuses, kind of. But in this time, where Bridgerton is set, artists is a respectable profession. It's not this kind of debauchery. So I thought that was funny when they walk into his house and it's like, woo, this massive party. The other thing about Henry Granville's artist studio is apparently he said to Benedict, come by my studio and you'll see some of my work. And I'm not sure if the paintings on the walls of his house were supposed to be his work or if they just were paintings on the walls of his house.
I don't know. I mean, I think it was heavily implied that...
It was implied that they were his, weren't they?
Yeah.
That's hilarious. They're like 200 years out of date. Except for one. There's one in the scene where Benedict makes out with Madame Delacroix.
Yeah.
And then Granville's wife.
Yes.
They are underneath a painting that was done by Jacques-Louis David, one of the great French neoclassical painters, only about a few years off from where they were, And it's wonderful. It's a Cupid and Psyche.
Nice.
Which is perfect for Bridgerton, right? The idea, Cupid, the god of, he and Venus together are the god of love. And she's more kind of like sensual, everlasting love. And he's more like, desire, kind of eros.
Yeah.
But it's still love.
Yeah.
And then you have Cupid and Psyche, which is, the mind and the heart wrestling with each other. And this particular one that was above them, this David that they reproduced, was in Cupid and Psyche. Cupid's often he's always portrayed as either a little baby.
Like a cherub.
Yeah. Or a child of some kind. Because he is foolish. He's the foolish part of love. He's the immature part of love.
Right, okay.
He's the, just whatever, go with it. But when Cupid and Psyche, he's often drawn as an adolescent because he has to be a little bit older. Because in that picture that David did, Cupid's just nailed Psyche. She's laying back there and he's little pride on his little adolescent face. He's like, hell yes. So I thought that was a brilliant choice for that scene. And it is quite period appropriate. But to think that Henry Granville did that, that's not English. It's not it's hilarious. No, he would never.
And of course, the second scene I want to talk to, which you've already touched on a little bit, is one of the pivotal scenes of Daphne and Simon's growing attachment, which is at the art exhibition. So you've told us a little bit about the exhibition and its history and also how the art was chosen. Can we talk about some of the characters' reactions to the art? So we have, I think, two contrasting reactions. We have Eloise and Penelope with their baby feminism at the beginning of the exhibition. And then, of course, we have Daphne and Simon looking at the landscape in the other room. So let's talk about Eloise and Penelope as budding art critics first.
Absolutely. Oh, can I just put a little caveat here?
Yes.
And I need to say, Simon said he loaned the painting.
Yeah.
Or gave it to the Royal Academy. That's not how it works. Right, okay. It was like, the Royal Academy has a very small collection. They don't actually own anything. That was all plot set up. But it doesn't matter. I'm not mad. I just had to tell you because, and for instance, the one that Eloise and Penelope are looking at, by that point, is like 35 years old. Only new art at the Royal Academy Summer Exhibition. Only new art. Anyway, I'm not mad. Like I said, I'm not mad. But Eloise and Penelope looking at, I think it was a Venus. What was it? Venus and...
Was it the nymphs? I thought it was nymphs.
Yes. So the nymphs bathing. Eloise notes that all the women were depicted as objects, as decorative objects. And she's spot on. Absolutely. And often mythology and even biblical history, was used as kind of cover for just some good old-fashioned titillation, some good old-fashioned TNA, which is what you had in that picture. Mm. And it was for, there was a respectable veneer over it, so ladies could see it, and it was all right. But yeah, it was supposed to be attractive, and it was a very male gaze kind of thing. And so she was right to notice that.
Was it only women who were painted as nudes? Like, did they have male nudes in these stories as well? Because Cupid was covered up.
They do have male nudes. There are male nudes in art of this period, but they are not sexual. And this is what's really... So if they are nude, they're usually the bits are covered up.
Right, yeah.
Or, yeah, almost always in Renaissance work, she would get like some naked men. Look at the statue of David, right, is naked. But it is definitely not sexualized. His body is gloried in, but not his dick. His dick is not part of the show. It's just there. And that was very deliberate, because they felt large genitalia on men showed that you were savage and you were unrefined, whereas a little tiny penis means you're very thoughtful and you're a philosopher. Did you know that?
I didn't. I didn't know that. I'm taking it in at the moment.
That's, yeah.
I'm going to have to think about that for a little while. That's very interesting.
Yes. So the nudity in the men is always either heroic, like they're in battle and you're trying to show somebody, as a heroic ancient god type reference, or it's discreetly covered. So if Cupid's running around naked with Venus and various other gods and etc. If Cupid's running around with them and he's also nude, his bits will not show the way their bits do. Right. It's a bit like in comic books. You know how like all the women end up in very sexual poses in comic books if they're fighting a battle or something, but the men are all, kind of, they're not in sexual poses, they're in battle poses or something. It's about male gaze.
Right. So let's go back to Daphne's painting. So that landscape that she and Simon discussed. So Simon could not have given that painting to the exhibition, nor would it have been a problem for him to get it back, which is right.
Because the Royal Academy has no collection.
Right.
They only collect what they call the diploma work from their members. So every member gives them one during their lifetime, and that's it. So that's all they have. That's all they've ever had. But I think it's good that they did this. I mean, because besides me, nobody cares that beautiful 17th century landscape would not be part of it. And it was a really touching moment between them that she could show Simon what she saw in that landscape. And I think it's one of the things that helps you get into art is if you're looking at it and someone is talking you through it and talking through, especially their emotional reaction to it. And it kind of allows you to become closer to the art, to like see it in a new way. And that's what was happening with Simon. So I love that scene so much.
Oh, that's really nice.
Yeah.
All right, let's talk about specific pieces now.
Okay.
Can we start with the portraits?
Absolutely.
Because there are a few through the series, often almost like Easter eggs.
Kind of. I mean, portraits of the actual actors?
Well, sometimes portraits of the actual actors. There's portraits behind the Queen, for example.
Yes. Oh, let's talk about this.
Okay.
Let's talk about this.
The portrait in the Queen's throne room first.
The portrait in the Queen's throne room. Well, there's a few. Actually, the very first painting you see behind the Queen is so... I mean, if you're an art historian, you just go... And they filmed this at Wilton House, which is a famous old aristocratic house. And that is a real Van Dyck, a real Antony Van Dyck, who was the court painter to the monarchs and all the nobility in London in the 17th century. And he basically created the genre of English portraiture. He brought it over from Netherlands and it came here here, we're not there.
London, England.
It went to England. He basically created the whole thing. And one of the things he did is he was able to create portraits of nobility and royalty that looked super snobby and super extra. There's something incredibly imposing and grand about his paintings and his subjects. And what I love in the first scene, when you see the queen and all her kind of entourage around her with all their dogs, which is brilliant, and they are kind of looking down their noses at the debutantes who are all completely scared. Behind them, you have the real nobility of 17th century England looking down their noses at those same people, which is just brilliant. I think it's fantastic. So that's a real Van Dyck, and all the art historians went, oh! The other portraits that appear in and around the Queen are fantastic. So there's another scene where they have the contortionist with the heels, which I heard you guys had problems with.
I have to say, if you're going to be a contortionist, I think it's just a level above to also be a contortionist in heels.
Absolutely. Yeah. I would think it would be extra balance as well. Yeah. Anyway, I have no opinion on that.
Right.
But behind the Queen is a single portrait of a nobleman who's obviously not white. Apparently, this was a composite that the producers did. So it is a real portrait of a real man of color by Velázquez, the famous Spanish painter. But the actual man was, I think, a servant or even a slave or ex-slave. I can't quite remember. But he was not somebody who was of high rank. And Velázquez painted him. So they took his head and they put it on another body that was wearing sumptuous, noble clothes. So kind of creating that world that they've created in Bridgerton. And they're putting people of color in to their paintings and the history. So the idea that the lineage of people of color goes way back in this place. So right behind Queen Charlotte, which was really awesome. The other one that you see, this was my favorite because I got to do some detective work on this. So when Violet and her lady's maid are going to have tea with the Queen, and you see them walking down this grand picture gallery, and just as they're turning in, right there in the corner, you see a beautiful portrait of a woman of color. And I thought, that's got to be there on purpose. So I found out it's at Lancaster House, which is now owned by the UK government. And I looked at their online, virtual tour. Every painting is the same, but I couldn't see that far painting, but it didn't look like the right one. So finally, I emailed everybody, and I got through 6 people. I finally found Lancaster House, and they have confirmed that one painting is not what hangs in Lancaster House. And they wouldn't have switched it out because they would have mentioned that. So that was CGI'd in.
Oh, wow.
So they care so much about building this world that they have CGI'd a lot of the just little subtle details. People of color are here. People of color have lineage here. And especially in the palace with Queen Charlotte. So that was really cool.
That is really cool. Thanks for your detective work on our behalf.
Oh,
That's
no
amazing.
worries. Well, I actually looked to see if it was, because there are portraits at this time of people of color. You know, they exist. European portraits of people of color are everywhere. Well, not everywhere, but they are there. But I couldn't find these exact ones. And that's why I think they're probably composites. I don't know for sure, but I think they're probably photoshopped in some way.
Yeah. Let's talk about the portraits of the actors. Because
Yes.
we have a bucket load of them.
Yes.
So one of the very first shots that we get of the show, we see portraits of the oldest 3 Bridgerton boys and the oldest 3 Bridgerton girls.
Yes.
So family type portraits.
Mm-hmm. So the Bridgerton portraits, as they go up the stairs, the boys on one side, the girls on the other side, which is very on brand for Regency to do a group portrait of the sons and then a group portrait of the daughters, because of course you need more flowers in the other one.
Right.
But the men's portrait is very interesting because it is basically a takeoff of one of Sir Joshua Reynolds' portraits. And The three brothers are posed in the exact same way. So it's really interesting to kind of compare side by side. And actually, if you do compare those two, you see what I mean about everybody needing to be pale. It's really difficult today to get away from the kind of colors we have available. And the kind of colors that they would have had available were just not as vibrant. So you didn't get really truly vibrant colors until the mid-19th century. So everything looks a little muted. And I think if you look at those two, like the Bridgerton boys and then the original by Sir Joshua Reynolds, side by side, you can kind of see that the Bridgerton boys are just a little, they pop a little bit more. There's just a little bit more yellow. There's just a little bit more blue, you know, all those kind of things that would just kind of come out to us. The daughter's portrait is apparently a composite of various other portraits. So the pose Daphne is doing is based on something that's in the Met, I think a picture in the Met. She has a parasol on her lap, and, you know, so things are copied exactly from other period pictures, and then the artists just put in the actors' faces. So to make it look as realistic as possible, I think they did a great job.
Is that true of the portraits of Simon's parents as well? Because we have quite elaborate, huge portraits of both the Duke and the Duchess of Hastings.
Yes, that is true. There's two portraits of Simon's mother. One where she's wearing a pink dress, and the other when she's wearing kind of a hood thing. Now, the pink dress, I have seen similar ones by Gainsborough. I think they kind of took it as inspiration. Sometimes they're just too generic to tell, you know, exactly where they went for this inspiration. But the interesting thing about that portrait in the pink dress of the former Duchess of Hastings is that there's nothing behind her. There should be something behind her. We don't get to the just kind of dark background in English painting anyway, you know, for another 50 years, 40 maybe. So there should be in that portrait some kind of background, no matter how vague, or, you know, just a suggestion of a tree or a column or, you know, something.
Well, it's interesting because I think even the way that you talk about how careful they were with the art that they had hanging, it's interesting that they chose Reynolds as an inspiration for the Bridgerton brothers, because it really cements them as really popular and central to
and rich
to the story as well. So, you know, it's almost a visual indication of how popular they are, I guess, like how in vogue they are, how important they are as a family.
Yeah.
And then when we talk about that portrait of Simon's mother, who is virtually unknown and unknowable through the course, and to have her set against nothing so that we know nothing about her except, you know, what we can glean from the portraiture. Do you think that the artists were telling us things, or?
I think they were. I mean, I think the choice of the Duchess of Hastings in the pink dress with roses, I mean, pink being a very innocent and flirty and fashionable color at this time, you know, I think that kind of shows her innocence and her goodness. So that kind of reinforces what we know about that character, because we don't really know that much about her. We don't really see her that much. The other choices, for example, Simon's father is in a very traditional, you know, kind of almost military style. It's a full length. He's self-important. He's, you know, all those things that we know about him. So that kind of reinforces it. And the Bridgertons are just, they have lovely portraits, which really is so on brand for them, isn't it? Especially the girls, you know, which it's all very breezy, as in the style of Gainsborough. I mean, you couldn't mistake it for a Gainsborough. But in that style, it's all very breezy, it's all very whimsical, and that's kind of how they are as a family, you know. And even the brothers there, I mean, it's based on a Reynolds portrait of three friends who are kind of super at the top of their game.
Yeah, it's interesting because one of the things that we talk about a lot as we discuss the show is the costumes and how all of the different families have
their
colors. And it's interesting that the Duchess of Hastings is wearing pink because Lady Danbury's colors are red and Simon's colors are quite deep red as well. And then you sort of see the costumes changing towards almost a purple as they start to mix with the blues of the Bridgertons. It's interesting as well because if you look at the portrait of Simon's dad, he's wearing red breeches.
Yes.
So even though Simon would be quite happy to not have his father in his lineage, his father's like, yeah, fuck you, I'm wearing red breeches. So
yes,
you can't cut me out of the family altogether. Even though he's, it's not the most prominent aspect of what he's wearing.
And actually, now that I'm looking at Simon's dad again, notice he's got these weirdo boots. These are like 17th century boots. They're very out of date. That's been more something for Hillary, perhaps, but it does. And the pose, etc. This is Van Dyck.
Right.
This is, the portrait of Simon's dad is what we talk about when we talk about Van Dyck as a genius of the snobby portrait, the power portrait.
The power portrait.
Yeah. So maybe that was, his boots there are a nod to Van Dyck.
Yeah, and potentially a nod to the lineage of it, putting him more into history to stretch the lineage back a little bit further.
Exactly.
Yeah. Let's finish off our discussion about the portraits with the portrait that Henry paints of Daphne and Simon that takes center place in the middle of an outdoor ball, which irritated Rudy to no end. So would you, if you had a portrait painted, would you in fact display it at a ball? Is that a thing that would happen?
I have not heard of that.
Right, okay.
But I cannot say for sure that you wouldn't. I can tell you one thing. If it started to rain, you would rescue that portrait. I'm like, it practically ruined the end for me. It's supposed to be this big romantic thing. And I'm like, the portrait is getting rained on. I know it's only done on an inkjet printer, but still.
It would have been done in oils, wouldn't it, at this stage?
Yes, it would have been done in oils, but this one is very clearly a photograph that has been photoshopped up and then printed.
Right.
Which is why you don't see it very close. I noticed a lot of them, I think they used the technology that they had to make it all look very real, but the problem is it doesn't look real if you get close.
Right.
So that's why none of the paintings in this series you're going to get close up on. Even the ones that are original, the ones that are real and original in there, it kind of doesn't matter. But the ones where they've taken, for instance, in Henry's art studio, those aren't the real paintings. They've just taken them and printed them out from high-res digital photos. So, of course, if you see the texture, you're going to know.
Right.
So you just have to keep your distance. And I think it was a bold choice with this one because they did manage to get relatively close. Yeah. Also, the notion that they could do that he could pull out a portrait like this in, what was it, like a week maybe?
Yeah, look, I think it would have been generous for a week. It really felt like they posed for half an hour together and then boom, oil painting, just ready for the ball.
Yeah, that's just not how it works.
So how long would a painting like that have taken normally?
Oh, it's hard to say. It really depends on the artist, but hundreds of hours.
Right.
Hundreds.
And oil paintings, don't they take like a full month to dry anyway?
They take a while to dry. It depends. I mean, you can display them before they're dry.
Right.
As long as you don't, get any kids running into them or something. It wouldn't have been varnished. You'd need to varnish a work before you've actually protected it.
Right.
So, just leave it out in the rain, guys. Look, I'm glad everything's going well and you're getting back together, but can we talk about your portrait? You paid a lot of money for that.
Oh, well, they're happy now. They can have another one done.
Well, if it only takes 2 days, why not?
Exactly.
Yeah. Get 12 of them done. Yeah, it's a good rendering of it, but I mean, like all the portraits in Bridgerton, no art historian would think that this was from the period. There's just obvious differences, and that's fine because the audience generally isn't that discerning as far as these things go, and most people aren't as pedantic as me, and I realize that. But yes, this is clearly not a 19th century portrait and clearly not done in 5 seconds.
one of the pieces that was incredibly prominent through a number of scenes was the white horse behind Anthony in his study.
That's a Stubbs. Every good 18th, early 19th century gentleman has a Stubbs.
Right.
Stubbs was the most famous painter of horses. He could do incredible horses. And if you're a horsey person and you don't know Stubbs, you've got to check out Stubbs. And I think those portraits in the gentleman's studies tended to be very, very on brand. You know, they had about sporting or, you know, it was so funny. I don't know for sure because I couldn't see it exactly, but I think in Lord Featherington's study above his mantle, it's a shipwreck.
Oh, God.
That'd be the best.
I
can't confirm it 100%, but I think it is.
I really think that the people who chose the art for Bridgerton were telling the audience
Absolutely.
a lot of things. Like they were
giving clues to the story and the characters. Absolutely.
Well, and particularly the horse behind Anthony, which is, you know, it's a very wild horse. It's a white horse.
It's rearing up.
A dark background. It's clearly lost its way and is scared and fighting. So.
Needs to be tamed.
Well,
or is that season 2?
Maybe. Needs to calm the fuck down is what it needs to do.
Needs a tranquilizer.
But I mean, there's other art through it as well. There was the paintings in Daphne's bedchamber.
Yes, I want to talk about those.
Yeah, because they're historical paintings, now that I know what a historical painting is.
They are. I couldn't find who they were. One of the, there's a great article that was written on the art of Bridgerton by one of the curators of the Getty Museum. He says they're after Boucher, and I see that, but I couldn't see exactly what they were. Mm-hmm. But they do seem to me like either Venus and Cupid or Cupid and Psyche subjects.
Right. Which
would speak to Daphne's wanting to marry for love and her innocence, and, you know, especially Venus and Cupid. Venus and Cupid is the idea of a mature love and initial desire working together.
Right.
In the most chaotic way possible, because Cupid is not going to make anything easy. He's blind. He goes wherever he wants to go. He's immature. He's lustful. He's desireful. And then Venus has to kind of follow him with something real and substantial. And then you have Cupid and Psyche, which we talked about, which are just the idea of the love and the mind and the heart and the mind getting together and trying to reconcile a relationship out of it. So I think they kind of speak to Daphne's innocence and her struggle and they work very well in her blue bedroom, which is very blue Bridgerton house.
Very blue, the Bridgertons.
Wedgwood blue, apparently. So a nod to Josiah Wedgwood, whose ceramics you can see in, I think, 3 of their bedrooms. And actually, that kind of also cements them as old money. So Josiah Wedgwood, incredibly famous and an incredibly established artist, but also having a huge conscience. So he was part of the abolition movement. He made badges for the abolition of slavery, you know, back when I guess they didn't have plastic buttons. Right. I might as well have Wedgwood make them. So he was, you know, very supportive of really progressive causes, and that's quite sympathetic, and that's the way we see the Bridgertons as well. So they're in Wedgwood blue, which I think kind of makes them very nice. Whereas the Featheringtons are in, their house is kind of in greens and other kind of more, well, the girls are in citrus, but the darker shades. And also they have, I don't know if you've talked about their interiors.
No.
Okay. So they have got these 2 side tables done in the Egyptian manner, which was a fad back when they first discovered the tombs when the Western people first discovered the tombs in Egypt. And there was, like, in the late 18th century, there was this Egypt mania, and they started making English furniture with, like, sphinxes for legs, and it was interesting, but, you know, kind of quickly passed because it was just ugly. And the Featheringtons have 2 Egyptian side tables. So if you look on either side of their fireplace, you can see 2 Egyptian side tables with like pharaohs and little things there, which just shows that they're into trends and that their taste is questionable. But yeah, so I think that kind of just really showed the difference. There are a few other paintings in the Bridgerton House that show family, I think. I mean, they're not the Bridgertons who are living there. So like above their fireplaces, there are a few portraits. I think then that shows, and they're quite nice, friendly, intimate portraits. And I think those were chosen deliberately because this is a nice, friendly, intimate family. The other thing I'd like to talk about is the people who aren't rich. Will and Alice, Madame Delacroix, and even Eloise in her bedroom have prints on the wall.
Right.
So if you look at Will and Alice's house, this is what most people would have. You could have access to prints at pretty low income level. So a lot of people would have been able to have that. And then that would basically be the decoration of most people's houses, would be various prints. And his are all of boxing. And in fact, there's one at the bar when he agrees to be Simon's second. And if you look in the background, it's just a brawl. It's not a boxing match. It's just like a full-on street fight, which I thought whoever chose that, chef's kiss. Mwah. There's also boxers in his main family area. And then there's also in Eloise's room, there is a portrait of Mary Wollstonecraft right above her desk, which is fabulous. And then she has a couple of prints as well, but I could not see what they were about. But what they are is in color, because that shows that she has more money. So if you want to put a print up, and you had a bit more money to spend on it, you could get it colorized and enlarged a little bit. So the ones at Will's house are very small, and they're all kind of basically monochrome. And the one Eloise has 2 prints in her room, and they're quite big in color. Okay. I wish I knew what they were about.
What about in Madame Delacroix's shop?
She had a print on the wall. Right. It is interesting. Actually, I will say another thing about Daphne's bedroom is that she's got in her kind of antechamber, not her bedchamber, she has examples of embroidery and cuttings and even like hair handcraft, women's handcraft that are on the wall there. And I think, again, that's showing women were creating a lot of art, but we just didn't see it as art, or the society didn't see it as art. And to like the struggle, even today, to get people to take embroidery or crochet pieces or things seriously as works of art is really tough, because they have it in their heads that it's just painting and sculpture and that's it. So again, it was a little homage to women's domestic art that was quite unrecognized, and maybe that goes along with a lot of what Daphne's experiencing as well, of all the unrecognized labor that you have to do.
I know we've focused a lot on the paintings. Do you have anything that you'd like to add about the statuary?
There's a good little visual joke in the Featheringtons' living room of the statuary, because on one wall you have 2 alcoves with classical statues. And then on the other wall, as I mentioned, you got the Egyptian stuff. It's just a total mishmash. Right. It's just, and I thought that was really funny that they were there together. I don't know if they would have been or not. It's hard to say. And I'm not an interiors expert, but I thought that was funny. The other thing was, like, in Simon's house, there are huge galleries of busts. Yeah. And again, that's just showing his lineage. So probably starting in about the 17th century, portrait busts became a real thing as well. Rather than a painted portrait, a bust was an equally prestigious option. Right. So you have that kind of running all the way up into the mid-19th century. So an entire gallery of portrait busts shows Simon's heritage, or the heritage of the Hastings line. And that they have to literally walk up and down them. I thought that was a really beautiful shot as they kind of walk up and down, and they're kind of almost hemmed in by these statues by this lineage of his that he doesn't want to own, really. And they kind of are pushing him in an uncomfortable way. I thought that was great.
That's all for this episode of What Would Danbury Do? You can hear all our bonus episodes and our analysis of the entire first season of Bridgerton the TV show by subscribing wherever you get your podcasts or visiting our website, bridgertonpod.com. In the meantime, you can find Nancy online at nancylangham-hooper.com or via her YouTube channel, The Art Doctor, where she regularly prescribes pieces of art to help with a variety of ailments. As always, you can find us on Twitter and Facebook as @BridgertonPod and Instagram as WWDDpod, or send us an email at bridgertonpod@gmail.com. You've probably got a couple more days to send us any burning questions you'd like answered in our Q&A episode that's coming up very soon. This episode was recorded on the traditional and unceded land of the Wurundjeri and Bunurong people, and edited by audio producer Rudy Bremer on Tharawal country. Thanks for listening, and remember, WWDD. What Would Danbury Do is part of the Frolic Podcast Network. Find more podcasts you'll love at frolic.media/podcasts.